welcome to Two Steps Forward, where sustainability meets business reality. I'm Joel Makower here in Oakland, California, and I want to say hello to my co-host and friend in London, Solitaire Townsend. Hi, Soli.
Hi, Joel. How's your summer been?
I know we've been on hiatus during August, like so much of, more people on your side of the pond than here in the States, although here we've been laying a little bit low as well. Summer was okay. There are a lot of things swirling about in my world, professionally, certainly, and just been a little confusing, but, still exciting, still engaging, still very, very, very interesting times. That's probably not going to change for quite a number of seasons going forward, but it's just, wow. I mean, processing what's going on in the world, not just in sustainability, is just becoming a full-time job for if you want. I mean, or you just shut it out and you dig your head in a hole, bury your head in a hole, whatever, and look the other way and just, get on with life and not worry about it. I'm not sure how to navigate that, to be honest with you. I'm a news junkie. I like to stay tuned in. Obviously, I care about a lot of things, notably in the sustainability world. So it's hard to do that. And then you throw in just personal and other stuff, and summer is just another season, I guess, but a little bit hotter. How about you?
Well, I'm going to give you a little tiny, little Soli knowledge dump. So, if you've ever read any Jane Austen books, these are romance books of, ladies and gentlemen and broken hearts and promises, all set within people's beautiful homes with long dresses. And no one ever talks about why there's loads of gentlemen in uniform, sort of very dashing gentlemen in uniform. It's because the Napoleonic Wars were going on at the time that Jane Austen's books are set. But you wouldn't know. And the reason why you wouldn't know is because back then, people didn't get much news. This was even pre-newspapers. Maybe you might hear about things from the king might make an announcement, or perhaps you'd know someone who personally had been involved in something. But human beings have never had this kind of access to what's going on to other human beings elsewhere in the world. And in one way, how magnificent that we can actually bear witness to what is happening in the moment rather than generations hence finding out what happened. But at the second time, holy moly, it's a lot. And it's a privilege, but it's also absolutely overwhelming to be the first people who have ever had access to live video in the moment, access to horrors and changes and unbelievable stuff happening all over the world. So feeling completely overwhelmed and not sure what to do with it is the most natural possible response.
And at the same time, having artificial intelligence at our beck and call, and wondering how much of what we're learning there or seeing out there in the world, in news, online, and social media, is actually real and is or has some kernel of truth, but is being enhanced, or is the gosh darn truth. We don't know so much, and so we know a lot more about everything, to your point, and we can question everything. Oh. And that's just a fascinating moment.
It's so I like to test AI because I ask it about things, as everybody does, and as the children in my family increasingly do all the time. And of course, it tells you something, and you ask it about the Napoleonic Wars, or you ask it about something, and it tells you a very informed, evidence-based, and confident response. But I also like to ask it about things I know a whole of a lot about. So I'll ask it about climate change, or I'll ask it about carbon, or I'll ask about what businesses should do. And I always disagree with its answers on the topics that I know a great deal about, which makes me wonder whether I should be being more careful when it gives me answers on things I don't know anything about. Maybe an expert in those subjects would be just as wrong. So if you ask it about should we claim to be carbon neutral, it will tell you that carbon neutral is a term that, whilst it has had some criticism, is widely supported by consumers and etc. So it's sounds like it's giving advice, whereas in fact it's telling you information that's about 3 years out of date.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because this carbon neutral thing is long been a challenge. I mean, going back to, I don't know, really early 2000s, I think is when it started to catch on. Actually, Interface, the carpet company, was one of the first to use it back around 2000. I want to say 2002, 2003, where they said they want to create the first carbon neutral carpet. And by the way, went pretty far along that route to do that. But more recently, everything, it seems, can be carbon neutral. Carpet, I guess, is one thing, but how about airplane travel? How about, foods? How about, you name it. How about liquid natural gas, LNG, that's shipped across oceans in tankers? I mean, Shell has been claiming carbon neutral LNG, because they use carbon credits to plant trees and do a number of what's it called, natural, what's the term? I just went blank on it. Nature-based solutions. Sorry, little mind trip there. And some of those things work, most of them don't, and it's becoming more and more fraud. I mean, the terms people use, carbon neutral, carbon positive, carbon negative, and by the way, which is which? Is carbon negative good and carbon positive bad, or is carbon positive good and negative is bad? I think it's the first one, that carbon negative means you're drawing down more carbon than you're emitting. But
yes, and that's what's in the Paris Agreement, and that's how the scientists would talk about being carbon negative.
Yeah, but there's the terminology, and then there's just how are you getting there, and is it anything? And then more often than not, it's not. It's not real, and companies are getting spanked now. Just Apple, which is arguably one of the leading companies in sustainability, just got spanked by a German court for using neutrality claims. I think it was with their Apple Watch. They called it CO2 neutral, and they said it violates the law because of what Apple was doing to claim that were some trees or other protected areas that they were only protecting through 2029, so for 4 or 5 years. It's like, that's not right. This has to be protected for centuries or millennia or whatever, because that's what we need to do to stem the climate crisis. And so there's more and more of those, and now companies are trying to figure out what to do. So, I mean, Soli, what do you do?
What do you do? So, first of all, let's cut ourselves some slack in the fact that there's a lot of pushback against carbon neutral claims. There's a lot of anxiety about the offset, not just anxiety, but like downright cynicism about the offset universe. There's a lot of essentially people talking, and I've been one of them, about the fact that this is not a robust claim to make. But go back 10 years ago, go back 15 years ago, let's cut ourselves some slack. It was a good idea. We didn't have the information that we had now. We didn't have the insight that we had now. It surely did not have the mandate from business, government and the public to do what we're trying to do now. Renewable energies were still really, really early on, and the idea that you could ever target to become 100% renewably powered was almost unthinkable. So the concept of carbon neutral, I think, was a really necessary step in our evolution. But like any necessary step in our evolution, its time ends, and then it hangs round a bit as a sort of missing link that maybe we don't need anymore. So when it was pretty much the best we could do when you go back a generation or two, in terms of going, hey, we're putting all this carbon up, maybe we should do some things to balance that out. Maybe we should plant some trees. And in fact, maybe we should even, wild idea, measure how much carbon we're putting up there in the atmosphere. Again, this is really early. No one was doing that. No one even had a protocol for how much carbon you as a company were responsible for. And then maybe you should do something about that carbon. Maybe you should plant some trees or invest in biochar, or try to enable other people to bring their emissions down. That led to where we are now. It's a little bit like there needing to be a steam age in order to lead to an industrial age. Led to where we are now of thinking, hey, actually, maybe we need to reduce the carbon, not just offset putting it up. And we're now in a very different situation with net zero and with what's going to come after net zero, because net zero won't be forever after, in terms of going, how do we actually reduce the amount of carbon we're putting into the atmosphere rather than just offsetting it. But so just don't use the term carbon neutral. You can't use it in Europe anyway anymore, let alone in particular markets and with the Green Claims Code. But there is a big danger with us cutting off the term carbon neutral and sending it into the sort of the long goodbye, sort of waving it off into the graveyard of sustainability terms, which is millions, even billions of dollars are going to nature through carbon offsetting. They might not be what we actually need, but by cutting off carbon neutral, we're also going to be cutting off one of the biggest capital flows to nature that we currently have. So what do we do? How do we make sure that we're not giving companies a get out of jail free card, which is if you can sign a big enough check, you can do whatever the hell you want, which is the big problem with carbon neutral. You're basically just signing a check, permission to pollute, payment to pollute. It's like the what we used to have in the UK, which is if you paid a priest enough, he would give you absolutions. The pardoners would pardon you. So that's cut that off, just like we stopped sending pardons, cut that off. But in doing so, you're also cutting off a very, very, very significant amount of money that goes to nature. Some of that is misused, some of that is not managed in the right way, but a lot of it is very productive, and that there has been incredible programs of work, particularly with indigenous and traditional communities and with local ownership. And people go, oh, it'll be fine. Companies will still invest in that stuff. It's like, well, why? Why will companies still invest in that stuff? With a carbon neutral claim, they got to have a claim they could slap on products that they could stick on their website. They had a virtue signal. Why on earth would they continue to invest in nature? So we've got to try to think about ways that we get rid of and slice off and shut down the misuse of carbon neutral as a get out of jail free card, as a pardon, without throwing the baby out of the bathwater and going, yeah, but we also don't want the billions that go to nature anymore. So is there another way that we could incentivize investment in nature?
Yeah, I hear you, and particularly the part about investing in nature, but I want to step back for a second, because I think we often think about all of this so wrong, and human nature, and certainly in sustainability, as you know really well, is to take the easy way out, and writing the check for absolution or whatever it is one way of doing that. But also think about, and I'm going to use an analogy here, and we'll come back to climate, is recycling or waste, let's call it, because every school kid, I think, still knows the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle. Yeah. And that's more than just an alliteration, that's a hierarchy. So the first thing you want to do is reduce the amount of stuff. The stuff you do have, you want to reuse it as much as possible. That includes repairing it and sharing it and all sorts of other things. And then at the very, very end of its useful life, you want to recycle it. But we, humans, go right to recycling thinking, okay, it's recyclable, and forgetting those first, bypassing those first 2 R's. In energy and carbon, it's efficiency, renewables, and offsets, which is to say use the least amount of energy you possibly can to do what you need to do, whether it's manufacturing or living your life and keeping your food cold. Of the energy you do use, you want to maximize the amount of renewable energy that you're using. And of the brown energy that you end up using, that's what you want to somehow offset to get using carbon credits or nature-based solutions or whatever mechanism it is. And again, we go right to offsets. We bypass the efficiency, the renewables part. Not everybody, but I think that's still, unfortunately, this has been going on for years and years, ever since these concepts first came into being. We still go right for the easy way out. And so, and then we end up with things like R.J. Reynolds, carbon neutral tobacco. I mean, what?
Yeah.
Come on. I mean, I don't, first of all, I don't understand how anybody would fall for a lot of these claims, carbon neutral airfare, carbon neutral natural gas, carbon neutral tobacco, or any number of things. But what do companies think of us that they're going in these places? So yeah, I mean, first of all, we're using them all wrong. Second of all, the terms themselves are problematic. The definitions aren't really there. And in some places you can't or at least shouldn't use them at all. So, is this trip even necessary? Yes, we want to keep funding nature. Nature, it's critically important because we need nature to solve the biodiversity crisis, the climate crisis. We need nature to support every sort of human activity, particularly clean air and food and clean water. So how do we continue to do those good things without using these just ridiculous, in my mind, terms?
And bastardized terms. So I've had some conversations with some really weird companies, including tobacco companies. I wouldn't work with them, but wanted to hear what they had to say. And of course, what they say is, we're a big legalized industry with consumers who care about climate. Just because it's an industry that I wouldn't want to work with. So number one, this is what happens when you write rules like that, is that they get used in different ways than you'd want to. And whilst I just find that argument really fascinating, of kind of going, yeah, why do I have a problem with using that term, with them using that terminology? They're a legalized industry with a footprint. Of course they should be taking action on sustainability, even though my gut goes, yuck, this is wrong. So this is, again, one of the issues with terminology. Another issue that we have is that the carbon neutral term is one that is recognised by the public, which almost nothing else is. ESG isn't recognised or understood. Net zero isn't recognised and understood, and is causing in some marketplaces real issues with it being bastardised. Was actually carbon neutral for a very long time, and indeed in many markets is still regarded as a positive. So we put huge amounts of effort and money into selling a concept that now we want to say, no, we were wrong, it's bad. So we have to be really careful with saying that kind of stuff to consumers as well, because it's like, hey, you did this good thing where you bought things which are carbon neutral because you wanted to make a difference. Haha, you were conned. It was all crap. This really undermines consumers' belief in what we're going to ask them to do next. Because if we keep telling them that everything that they're doing and everything which they think matters and everything which they think is good was actually greenwash after all, then why should they ever believe what we do next? So we've got to be really careful how we transition away from carbon neutral, and actually things such as making it a term that which you're just simply not allowed to use anymore is a really smart way of doing it, because it means there doesn't have to be big campaigns against it. We don't have to absolutely undermine it. We can just evolve onto something better. But what that something better is the really big question. That's why we're having everything from scope zero to carbon positive to climate friendly. Climate friendly is one that's being used a lot. Because when companies invest, they want to be able to engage with their consumers on this. It is a part of the business case. And I'm not going to come on and say, and the definitive term is, I'm not that much of a better.
Damn.
But does need to be. We had a term that the public recognised and valued, and we have now rightly identified that is no longer a term, not even a term, that's no longer a protocol that people should be using for how they go about. But we took a term like carbon neutral that wasn't very compelling, but which we managed to get some kind of recognition for, and we replaced it with a term like net zero, which is even less compelling. It's almost laughable how we managed to come up with a word that's even worse and less understandable to the general public. And that's one of the things which in our movement we tend to neglect and overlook and even pretend doesn't matter, is will anybody understand us when we talk about what the next thing is?
Yeah, and we tend to take something and run with it and go and use it to often some absurd degree until it becomes meaningless. But my question, Soli, is, and because you look at consumer behavior a lot, is you talk about this is meaningful to consumers, but do consumers really care about a claim like carbon neutral or carbon negative? And when I say consumers, I'm not just talking about that, let's call it 10% of the true green or the deep green or the evergreen consumers who think about this stuff and go shop with, those things. I mean, at least they say they do, and maybe they actually do some of that, at least for some products. But beyond that, the other 90 or whatever overwhelming majority of people, does this even resonate with them?
So it all depends on how much we're asking of these terms. Is someone going to actually not buy the product they're used to buying and have been buying for the last few years, and instead buy another product which has got this claim on it? Probably not. It's not a deciding factor in product choice. Almost none of these, from fair trade, none of them tend to be big deciding factors. But very little is in what is very saturated markets that we have nowadays. Pretty much cost tends to be one of the only deciding factors. There's a lot that goes on around preference, about feel good, about post-purchase communication and engagement. And there, particularly in terms of brand love, all these claims do have a lot of play, which is why companies use them. They test them. They spend a lot of money identifying which part of the Net Promoter Score, or the brand love, or the identification with this will help build. And for different products in different categories, it's been really successful, which is why people continue to use it. Again, not a defining definition of going, I absolutely will only choose this kind of product. That's the 10%. But going, I feel a bit better about myself if it says that, then that's the case. So what we've got to think about as we, and again, I don't want anyone listening to mistake the fact that I'm defending carbon neutral. I'm not. We have got to move on from it, but we've got to move on to it into a better term than net zero, and we've got to move on to it in a way that still encourages huge amounts of capital going to nature around the world. Otherwise, we're solving one problem by cutting ourselves on the knees with another.
Well, you talk about certain products, certain categories are more, let's call it, amenable to these kinds of claims, or at least the consumers who buy these things are more amenable to understanding and believing them and acting on those claims. So what kinds of products, what kinds of categories?
Well, one of the things which we're very aware of is that women tend to care about all of these sustainability topics more than men, in some cases by a significant degree, and that gap is widening. So as you go younger, you find that younger women care more than older women do, and when you go to younger men care less than older men do. So that gap between genders is getting more significant on topics of sustainability and ethics. So what that means is that all these claims around sustainability tend to resonate more in household purchases, which, not to be gender normative, but 80% of household purchases are still made by women. So you're more likely to have a resonance with a sustainability claim on household goods, on foods, on beauty and personal care than you are, for example, if you were selling a Harley Davidson. So that's one of the issues, particularly in this moment of green hushing, which I'm saying to a lot of my consumers and clients of going, just check your actual consumer, because there's all this conversation about a pushback against sustainability and that people aren't as interested as they were. If you're selling to women between the ages of 18 and 45, you might find that category really cares about these topics and in fact are caring more. And that one of the things which I think is really interesting, that a lot of the categories like Harley Davidson and Bud Light and Tractor Company and Lowe's, who have been most under pressure on social and environmental issues and most pushed to drop them, are not the categories that traditionally women buy.
Yeah, but my sense is, and I'm going to play the cynic here because I think I am when it comes to these terms, is that consumers, women, in a lot of these products that you mentioned, care about these things, but it's like ninth on the list. After price, quality, efficacy, trust, brand awareness, convenience, all sorts of other things. So, I mean, how often does that really become the tiebreaker? It feels to me like it's going to be a really small number of people, even if overwhelmingly women are concerned about these things, and some men, that it's so far down the list on most products that now, if you're buying well, I was going to say a light bulb, but light bulbs these days are all LED, and so they're all pretty efficient. So that's even not even an issue. But I'm trying to think of a product where clearly the energy use is going to be impactful, and the fact that that somehow this is being negated could be a factor.
Okay.
But it just feels like it's such a small part that and that using these terms are so problematic that it may not be worth it for a lot of companies.
So two things on that. One, which is going to, I want to push back a bit on what you just said. And second, I want to agree with it. So I'm going to push back on it a little bit, which go, we are in utterly market saturation, where for every product SKU, for everything which is on a supermarket shelf, there's 10, 15, 20, 30 options. And if you go online, there's 50, 60, 100 options. So marginal gains in consumer preference is what all of marketing is about. Nobody has got something which is going to be the definitive between this product, and every company is fighting over a 0.5 preference or a 0.7 increase, or if you get a 2% market reach increase, you're overwhelmed. So no, it's not definitive, nor is anything else. So if sustainability gives you a marginal benefit in terms of consumer group, that is extremely valuable when you're in highly, crazily saturated markets. So all of marketing is about extremely marginal improvements in terms of consumer preference here and there, and anything that gives you a boost is absolutely worth it. On the other side, there's lots of barriers to consumers fulfilling their views and their values and their preferences on these topics. They express these, we call it the value action gap, and we've talked about it on this podcast before. They express these very high desires for these topics, and yet you don't see it always playing out perfectly in purchasing. And one of the reasons is that they think that by buying something that's got a sustainability claim, maybe they're going to have to compromise on quality. So if you've got to make sure that by dialing up the sustainability, you're also dialing up, you're making you're showing how sustainability makes something more quality rather than less quality, that there's lots of trust issues against the company lying to me. So making sure you're not making stupid claims, you're not saying carbon neutral, that you're really giving a lot of evidence. So finding those benefits that go along with sustainability is really, really important. But there's lots of conversations about whether we should even be talking about consumers at all. And I find those really infuriating, because they sort of say that consumer action doesn't matter, that all that matters is political and leadership action. And again, it gets a bit gendered for me, because it's like going, okay, so when 70% of business leaders, and when there's more guys called John in the FTSE 500 than women, when activism is overwhelmingly led by men and political action is still overwhelmingly led by men, you're basically saying the only thing that matters is big public activist or political action, which, by the way, is overwhelmingly dominated by men. And the thing that doesn't matter is this pathetic little household consumer activity, which is utterly irrelevant and isn't going to make any difference to anybody, which, by the way, is overwhelming the thing that women do. And even when we think about throughout history, particularly here in the UK with William Wilberforce and trying to end slavery, one of the things which was, I mean, everyone always hears about the political and the House of Commons and all that. What very rarely people mention was the huge consumer boycott of sugar from America, which absolutely cut off a great deal of the import market for sugar at its knees. Entire families who were part of the slave trade went bust because of consumer activity. So I get it. Like, let's be careful with the claims. Let's dial up the benefits, but let's not dismiss the main way that most people, and particularly women, get to participate in making change.
Yeah, I hear you, Soli, and there's very little that I disagree with, but you've left out a big part of the equation. You talked about the consumer piece, you talked about the government activist policy arena, but there's also the B2B part, the supply chain part, where most of this action should be taking place, because I mean, depending on the product, some of it happens during the consumer use and disposal, like a laundry detergent or something. But for most products, the overwhelming and even a laundry detergent, the overwhelming impacts are in the supply chain, things that way before it gets to the consumer. And there may be 2, 3, 4, 5 layers of supply chains where the component that gets put into a module gets mixed into something else, or a polymer that becomes part of a chemical, becomes part of a surfactant that becomes a detergent that gets sold to Procter & Gamble to make Tide. Just making that up, but that's not atypical. It feels like we're missing out on that, and if we're not really focusing on that. And by the way, so many of what happens in the B2B marketplace, in the B2B supply chain, isn't part of the value proposition of what is ultimately being sold. So if there's a zero waste factory or a renewably powered factory, 100% renewably powered factory that's making the surfactant that goes into Tide, what does Procter & Gamble get to claim on that? What are they? They're not going to. And yet that's potentially as big or bigger impact than anything that P&G or any other company, I don't mean to pick on them, might claim. And so this is a part of it that I think, certainly that I've been engaged in. You've been a little bit more on the consumer side. I started off on the consumer side decades ago and moved over to the sort of B2B side. It's not one or the other, but I do think that that's a massive opportunity space that is still not being seized.
Absolutely. So you might want to re-record some of this, because you just picked the worst example, though, because when you think about something like Tide, the consumer use phase outweighs the supply chain by like 10 to 1.
Okay, bad example.
Washing your laundry in hot water. So actually a huge number of consumer goods, so those consumer goods that we're talking about, the use phase massively outweighs. So in almost all food, the consumer use phase massively outweighs. Almost all personal care, the consumer use phase massive outweighs. Almost all white goods, the consumer use phase. So most things which are in our homes, the consumer use phase massively outweighs anything in the production cycle, because the energy, water, and indeed the inefficiencies in our homes, because our homes are really inefficient compared to most businesses, means they outweigh. A car, for example, the consumer use phase of a car massively outweighs its production materials. The industries where particularly supply chains really matter is in things such as the built environment, and within the B2B scenario itself. Technology,
furniture, apparel, and footwear. Exactly. I mean, those are all things that we do have in our homes that are, I think, much more impactful.
Apparel, particularly the washing of apparel, so the washing of clothing and the disposal of the clothing, again, the carbon massively outweighs the production. So the vast majority of consumer products, that even buildings and built environment, people would say that the use phase and how efficiently we use our buildings are much, much, much more than production. But that's not to say that it doesn't matter. It absolutely matters. But again, it's interesting that even you would say it's not as big and the supply chain matters more, because it's part of this whole dismissal of on the part of consumer of all of this. Like we've always decided that the consumer use doesn't matter. Literally had this argument with somebody the other day about ice cream, and about somebody going, yes, but it's all about the dairy farms. It's like, nope, it's about the ice cream in your fridge. You do the carbon, it's the energy use of your ice cream in your fridge versus even here we go. This is one of the craziest examples. Is the carbon footprint of a children's car seat. So children's car seat, great big hunk of plastic with multiple bits sourced from all over the world. You'd assume the supply chain would be more important than anything else. What the hell is the consumer use of a big plastic beyond throwing it away at the end? A child's car seat, the overwhelming footprint of a child's car seat is the extra gas it takes from the car because of the weight of it in the car. Particularly the weight of it in the car when your child isn't sitting in the seat. And so I think it's something like 2/3 of the footprint of a child's car seat is when it sits in your car when your child is not in it, and the extra marginal amount of gas that's used during its lifetime of 2 or 3 years.
So to come back to the claims. one of the issues I have with the claims, to your point about the biggest part of so many of these products are in the use phase. And sure, I mentioned apparel, and I shouldn't have, because that is the growing cotton and is a big part of it for cotton or the synthetic materials, but the consumer use, the washing and dry cleaning.
Yeah.
The carbon neutral claims on these products makes it feel, and I think dupes consumers into believing that all the work has been done for them before it gets to them.
Yeah.
I'm buying something that was made in a carbon neutral factory, or I'm buying something with a carbon neutral material. I'm being, whatever it is. I'm working in a carbon neutral office building. It takes the hook, it takes the pressure, lets us off the hook. It takes the pressure off consumers to actually have to do anything about these things. And I think that's where one of the places that I have so much trouble with a lot of these claims.
Yeah, and they don't invite the consumer to be part of it. So again, because most carbon neutral claims actually are about the supply chain. At most, you might get scope 1 and 2, and maybe you might have carbon neutralised or offset part of your scope 3 supply chain, but you sure as hell haven't signed a check to offset the consumer use phase, because no one can afford that.
Yeah.
Because that scope 3 consumer use phase is so big for so many companies. And actually, some companies like P&G have really put a lot of thought into that consumer use phase. So one of the things, of course, is that rather than letting us off the hook or making us as consumers feel guilty, is designing products that build in that behaviour change. So designing a Tide or designing a laundry that works so well in the 30-minute, 30-degree cycle. In the cold cycle for 30, or new products that we've seen recently like Wonder Wash that work on the 10-minute cycle. So where you're actually building out products where to reduce food waste, consumer food waste being a huge part of the food life cycle impact, the amount of embodied carbon that there is in the food that never enters a human being, never actually passes their mouth, is absolutely enormous. So getting rid of labels like best before, which encourage consumers to throw food away before they're actually ready, and instead replace that with use by, which basically has the date by which you shouldn't use it. Or even these exciting innovations that we're seeing where actually the packaging will change colour when the bacterial load reaches a certain level, and until that packaging changes colour, you can keep eating the product. So these all sound really small, squiggly little things, but build those up at scale, because that's how carbon impacts happen. Carbon impacts happen by billions of negative impacts building up at scale. There is no single big dial you can turn. You've got to turn millions of small dials, billions of small dials. And so actually, I'm really excited about every time you see an innovation that might solve one and turn down one of those small dials, because that's how we solve this.
I love it when you get excited, because you get me, and I'm sure a lot of other people excited about these innovations, and certainly a lot more hopeful than one can be reading the news these days. Before we let everyone go, Climate Week, New York Climate Week is coming up, third week in September, the week of the 21st. And once again, Futerra is hosting Solutions House. I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about Solutions House, what's going to be going on there this year.
Well,
and
I'm very much hoping that at Solutions House from the Monday the 22nd to the 23rd to Wednesday the 24th of September, I'll be around. Hopefully Joel will be around as well, and we're going to see some of Joel in the sessions and lots of other friends. It's much bigger than it's ever been. So this is our 4th year, and we're in a giant venue, and we've got much bigger capacity, and hundreds of people have already signed up, and we're all going to be doing the sessions online as well, so you can participate. Please register to join us online, because we're going to make a real effort to make sure that this is really collaborative with audiences around the world as well as what's in the room. We've got sessions with Hollywood, and where we've got some potentially even movie stars coming in, and we're going to be thinking about how storytelling and creativity can change the world. We've got sessions on sphere is and how we change the definition of net zero. We've got a session on basically how do we get back to the basics of circularity, and MasterCard's coming in to do that. We've got TED Countdown. The TED Talks people are going to be doing a big session. We do Solutions House Futerra in partnership with the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, and they're doing all these incredible sessions on things like supply chains. We're going to be stuff around. We've got some of the Brazilian folks coming in to talk to us about what's going to be happening at COP. We've got a big party on the Monday night, and I'm sorry, cover your ears if you don't like swearing. The big party on the Monday night is called Fuck Doom. So we've got a big party on the Monday night around actually how do we face into this overwhelming, this sucky, fatalistic moment and just say, fuck you. We're going to actually go for positivity and optimism and solutions. And then we've also got some other parties around creativity. We've got YouTube coming in and doing some stuff around food. Oh, we've got the Dandelion Project, which is all about women in sustainability. So I am really looking forward to this year. I need it. I need that kind of energy and engagement. And I really hope that people join us in live and online.
I think that we all need that, Soli, and I just wish you were a little bit more excited about it.
Do you know, mate? It's like, yeah. Hopefully, I'll get my excitement. That's literally me trying to manage my excitement because I want to tell you about all of them because they're so cool.
Yeah. And by the way, the details are not yet locked down, but I think Soli and I may be doing another live on stage episode of Two Steps Forward podcast at Solutions House. And by the way, if you want to go learn about any of this stuff, you go to, I believe, it's solutionshouse.net, and you'll see what's going on at Climate Week, New York City. And that's what's going on in this episode of Two Steps Forward. Be sure to subscribe or follow it wherever you get your podcasts, or go to twostepsforwardpodcast.com. You can learn more. Please subscribe to Trellis Briefing, the daily newsletter from Trellis Group. Just go to trellis.net to sign up and check out Soli's regular musings on Substack. And please follow us both on LinkedIn. That's it for this episode. We'll see you next time.